Good evening. Call to order the August 16th meeting of the Harbor Commissioner. Mary, would you call the roll, please?
Betsy Kramer.
Here.
Bill Spicer.
Here.
Corey Bantalin. Eric Friedman.
Here.
Frank Kelly. Jim Sloan.
Here.
Helene Webb, absent.
And Mr. Reedman, I guess, is not here for this meeting. So, Mr. Conman, are there any changes to the agenda?
Madam Chair, there are no changes this evening.
Thank you. This would be the time for public comment. Is there anyone who wants to make public comment on anything that's not on the agenda? There being none, public comment is closed. So the next is the department update. Mr. Conman. Oh, sorry. We should approve the minutes for the last. Do it a motion?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Approved. On to the department update. Mr. Conman.
Madam Chair, Commissioner, this past month there were 4 City Council actions that pertain to waterfront affairs. The 4 included the approval of a 5-year lease agreement with Channel Islands Outfitters, known to most of us as Paddle Sports. They also approved the assignment of a lease for one of our fine restaurants down on the waterfront, Sushi Go-Go, from the Wang family to the Kim family. And we're expecting to have the same fine fare moving into the future with them. The Council authorized the Waterfront Director to sign an agreement for our $10,000 vessel turn-in program grant through the Department of Boating and Waterways. You've heard a lot about that. We'll use that hopefully to get some derelict boats surrendered to us this year. And finally, they authorized the Director to execute a 5-year supplemental parking agreement with Santa Barbara City College to joint use parking in the Ledbetter parking lots. That's particularly important and later this month and early September when the joint use deals with students who are parking in our lots, et cetera. In terms of next month's meeting agenda, there's a new Brophy Brothers lease, the primary aspect of which will be the inclusion of On the Alley, formerly known as the Minnow Cafe, into the new lease agreement. And Director Reedman will provide you a FY12 budget review, what we projected, how we did, etc. And that concludes my director's report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mick. Are there any questions? Mr. Swan?
Yeah, Mick, just one question about the $10,000 grant for disposal of boats. A couple of years ago, or maybe it was last year, we talked about helping the county apply for the same funds, because I noticed that the boats down in the county seem to sit there a little longer than they do ours. Have we been able to help them obtain any of this money?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Sloan, the answer is yes. We didn't help them in so much as we got together with them and basically introduced them to the process by which they could apply for an Abandoned Watercraft Abatement Fund grant. I believe they applied for a grant to the Department of Boating and Waterways. They were approved for a grant. I can't say for sure how much it was or whether they were approved for the full amount that they requested. But yes, they did apply and they did have a grant approved.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Friedman.
I just wanted to clarify, the county did receive the grant for $12,000 for this year.
And that's for the whole county?
Correct, for the unincorporated area, yeah.
Right.
Any other comments? Then on to the Business Services Report. Mr. Bossy.
Good evening, Madam Chair and Commissioners. I have a rather quick Business Services Report with a number of activities to update you folks on. First of all, over the last fiscal year, we're proud to say that we have negotiated and executed 13 separate agreements, everything from Seacoast Yacht Sales to Sushi Go-Go to the Santa Barbara Fish Market offices. So a wide variety of leases were negotiated and executed. There is one interesting one in there, and that's the Police Department Annex. As we know, that's not down in the waterfront, but that was a special request by the city administration to help the police department negotiate a new lease for the police annex, which is in back of the police department headquarters on 222 Anapamu Street. So we were happy to help them out with that. Next on the list, the Wine and Roses Charity Regatta is happening this weekend, August 17th, 18th, and 19th. You'll probably see folks, if you're down in the area, trickling into the parking lot tomorrow afternoon. They have hired one of our parking attendants to be there the entire day Friday just to help make sure everybody gets in and gets set up okay. So there are no issues down there. This is the California State Catamaran Championship, and it's been hosted at Ledbetter Beach since August of 1996. This year's event will benefit the Tri-Counties chapter of the Make-A-Wish Foundation. And the regatta is taking up and paying for 130 spaces, and you'll see those spaces outlined here in blue. They are charged $7 per day for each of those spaces for a total of $910. And the event concludes on Sunday late afternoon, about 5 o'clock. So, and they've always left the parking lot in good repair and clean, and we've got a good relationship with them. So we're happy to see them come back here again this year, and we hope it continues into the future. Next, the Stearns Wharf Business Association and the City of Santa Barbara have again teamed up to bring the community its free Friday night movies on Stearns Wharf. As you may recall, we have already shown 2 movies on the wharf back in June, Beach Blanket Bingo as well as Gidget, and both were shown to solid crowds out on the wharf. We have 4 more movie nights planned, and it all starts back up again August 31st, Friday, August 31st, and the 3 successive Fridays after that. So on the 31st, we're going to have Shark Tale. On September the 7th, Journey to the Mysterious Island. On Friday, September the 14th, Overboard. And on September 21st, we're going to wind things up with Zookeeper. All the movies are family friendly. All the movies start at dusk. There is free parking out on the wharf after 7 p.m. So we hope folks out in the community grab their chairs, a blanket, and come out and get some good food on the wharf and show up for some good movies. Lastly, Wheels on the Wharf. We have events by Cruise Productions and Milpas Auto Gallery teaming up with the Stearns Wharf Business Association again to hold the first annual Stearns Wharf Fall Festival and Car Show, and they're calling it Wheels on the Wharf. And this event is tailored specifically for Stearns Wharf. It's something that they've wanted to do for quite some time. So it's tailored for Stearns Wharf and Stearns Wharf businesses. The event will feature a large selection of classic and exotic cars, anywhere between 60 and 85. They're trying to nail down an exact number depending on the space. There will be a children's play area, live music, a beer garden, carnival games, and it will, again, highlight Stearns Wharf restaurants and shops. The event benefits 3 local charities, Cares for Paws, the Kiwanis Club, and the Salvation Army. And the event is scheduled to take place on Sunday, November 11th. And that is paired up with Santa Barbara International Marathon, which takes place, or actually finishes down at the Ledbetter lot. So to take advantage of that influx of people, I believe that event is sold out and thousands of people come to town for that. So kind of capitalize on that event. This event will be held the following day, the following Sunday. The following day, let me clarify, which is a Sunday. And that concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Brian. Any questions? Commissioner Friedman.
Mr. Boss, you don't have to answer this. It's more of a tongue-in-cheek, but being we have a certain visitor off the shore, I was wondering if you had coordinated with him, being that the first movie is a Shark Tale coming out.
You're right, I won't comment on it. But we hope he doesn't show up for that particular movie night.
I guess that's the extent of the comments and questions. Yeah, thank you. Next is Mr. Treiberg's report.
Good evening, Madam
The
Chair and
Facilities
Commissioners.
Management.
A key performance objective for the Facilities Division is completion of 80% of what we consider minor capital improvement projects. These projects occur throughout the waterfront and the harbor, Stearns Wharf, and in the parking lots. This year, we identified 26 projects and completed 20 of them, which is one short of our goal of completing 80%. It's been a couple of years in a row that's happened, but we've had some furloughs and some other impacts that have affected how many projects we could complete. I've introduced you to some of these projects over the last year, including installation of the self-pay stations and the Chase Palm Park lot and the garden lot. Some of the work at the city pier recently, the water line work, the electrical work we've done there. Installation of fiberglass pile jackets on Stearns Wharf in response to kind of an emergency installation in response to some conditions we noticed when we were doing our inspections. And also repairing the elevator shaft at the Harbor Restaurant, which we felt was a critical item as well. The list here represents just how broad of an area we work in and the type of things we do. We've identified close to 30 for this year and already started on those, and once again, we'll pursue those diligently and hopefully achieve our objective. These smaller projects we typically do with staff and maybe some contractors, but the larger capital improvement projects, which I'm going to talk about one of them in just a moment, we start development of that program in just about another month. We work with the Public Works Department on that. The city staff has been directed to develop a 2-year budget, so we're going to have our capital improvement plan identifying 6 years worth of projects, with the first 2 years projects we expect to fund, budget for, and implement. The capital improvement program is going to be brought to the Budget Committee and to the Harbor Commission probably in September or October when we prepare that. And it's done in advance of the budget itself, but in consideration of the funds that we expect to be available in FY14. And I believe this is something that has come up at a previous Budget Committee meeting to get a little quicker look at our budget. And this will be sort of the first bite at the apple for the Budget Committee and the Commission. As I previously noted, we have a major capital improvement project starting up next month, and this is the final phase, the 4th phase of the breakwater cap repair project. We've completed phases in 2004, 2007, and 2010, and that's the straight section of the breakwater. And this last year, we asked the Harbor Commission and Council to approve changing one of our mid-FY13 projects from lights on the breakwater to completion of the breakwater cap itself. And so this is that project. We recently went out to bid. We had 11 people, contractors, attend the pre-bid job walk, and we had 4 bids. Bruff Construction Company, I believe out at Tascadero, submitted a low bid of $287,000. This is considerably lower than our estimate, which continues to reflect the competitive bidding climate that's out there. And I'm glad we're getting this project out to bid and constructed while the bidding climate is still good. It's been very good for several years now. Construction is tentatively scheduled to begin the middle of next month and to be completed probably by early November, just in time to beat the anticipated coastal storms and large waves. Access to the breakwater is going to be limited since the construction is on that curve section. People really won't be able to walk around it. They can get out to the breakwater by kayaking to the sand spit and walking back on it, but it's not possible to direct them through the construction area. Access to Marina 1 is a requirement of the contract. So we'll have a little causeway built adjacent to a section of this project just to get people down to Marina 1. So it'll be open for business the whole time with maybe a couple of temporary closures. Like I mentioned, this completes reconstruction of the breakwater cap and should provide protection from coastal storms for many decades to come. And this completes my presentation this evening.
Thank you, Carl. Are there questions, comments from the Commission? Well, I have a couple of questions. Will it be possible when the breakwater cap is being done to perhaps have it open on weekends for people? It seems unfortunate to have it closed for that entire period of time.
Madam Chair, it's unlikely because it'll be a peeled open construction zone with uneven surfaces and open rebar and so on and so forth. If an opportunity presents itself to open it up, we'll work with the contractor, but it's not a requirement of the contract.
Okay, thank you. The other question is that there was a report in Ed Hat this past week, I think, of a fire on the Stearns Wharf. I never saw any follow-up on that, or maybe it was an imaginary thing. Was there a fire?
Yeah, Madam Chair, it was a cigarette fire. We have several every year. They're pretty small. Fortunately, facility staff or Harbor Patrol or a lot of times the folks working in the restaurants get to them right away. We typically have a pretty aggressive response, but with Harbor Patrol and the fire department, we may want to make sure it doesn't spread. But yes, it indeed was a small fire, I believe, by the Harbor Restaurant. But like I said, fortunately, it was put out right away and nothing worth reporting.
Great, thank you very much. And then on to the Harbor Operations Report. Mr. Conlon, please.
Madam Chair and Commissioners, well, on July 27th, we had our seminal regatta of the summer, the King Harbor race. It was a great race this year. 93 boats departed Santa Barbara, and for a change, they actually zipped over the horizon in a hurry. The marine layer had parted, the breeze was up 10, 12 knots. It really was a lovely sight watching him head off. And there was no bad news from the race. Nobody fell overboard, nobody capsized, and they had good, steady winds all the way to King Harbor. The Yacht Club and Santa Barbara Sailing Center fielded 15 teams altogether and took home several awards. 2 Santa Barbara boats earned first-in-class awards, including Rock and Roll, skipper Bernard Giraud, I hope I pronounced that correctly, and Escapade, skipper Mark Noble. And the Flying Dutchman, a Hobie 33 catamaran, from King Harbor Yacht Club, skippered by Jason Herring, turned in the fastest corrected time of 7 hours, 56 minutes, and 46 seconds. It was a great race. The Yacht Club folks were very, very excited about how it all turned out, and great participation on our end, too, from the participating boats in Santa Barbara. The next item, it's interesting, I wrote this item a couple of weeks ago before everything you've seen in the papers the last couple of days about the posting for the shark warnings and what have you. So I'll start with this report, and I'll give you an update as to where we're at relative to that issue. About 11 a.m. on July 24th, the Marine Mammal Center informed Harbor Patrol that a reported shark-attacked wound on a sea lion that you can see right here. It was hauled out on one of the buoys for the waste oil barge in the East Beach anchorage. And based on that information, the Parks and Recreation Department and the Waterfront Department pulled the trigger, if you will, on an SOP that we've been working on for several months relative to posting the beaches in case of a shark sighting or a shark attack on a marine mammal, or God forbid, a shark attack on a human being. So per the SOP, what we did was we put these signs up on all city beaches, and now, and I'll get to this in a minute, it started at 8 choke points, but now we're up to 14 different places where we post the beach. We posted the beaches, you can see, on the 24th of July, and we left them up for the 72 hours per the SOP specifications. These weren't beach closures. I need to emphasize that. These were basically cautionary notices. They were intended to inform the public, not alarm the public. We all know that there are sharks in the ocean, but when we have sightings close to shore, we have this protocol that we've developed for alerting the public to that, and folks can certainly swim at their own risk. Yes, the Parks Department did close down some programs, some aquatic programs temporarily, and 72 hours went by, and the signs were removed. Well, lo and behold, Tuesday night, we had a surfer call Harbor Patrol and reported that he'd seen a great white shark come within 5 feet of him off of Ledbetter Point. So I came down to the office and I called the individual. What's most important in our SOPs, the real critical point, is verifying the credibility of the sighting, because that's the sort of the thin edge of the wedge. Everything opens from there. So I spent 20 minutes on the phone with this gentleman, and fortunate that I was a commercial fisherman for a lot of years and saw a lot of white sharks, I sort of was able to vet the individual's testimony, and he was sincere, and he was very calm, and he was dead on accurate as to what he saw. And he described an animal that was about 6 feet between the dorsal fin and the tail fin, and a gray back and a large girth, and so on and so forth. So we went with the protocol again, and we posted the beaches Tuesday night, because we wanted to make sure, as they call it, the Dawn Patrol surfers would all be able to be advised of that coming to the beaches on Wednesday morning. And we had a press release that went out very early Wednesday. Spent much of the day yesterday doing interviews with everybody from the Huffington Post to ABC to our local news and radio outlets. Sharks, are very attractive news fodder, and so we explained what we did and why we were doing it. Since then, we've been in discussions with the county. We're going to have a joint meeting with the county, so we all begin to finalize our sheet of music, if you will, so we work in concert with the county, because if we post East Beach, it stands to reason that there might be a need to post, east of that, continuing across the county line. So we posted City Beaches Tuesday night, and then sure enough, yesterday there was another reported sighting by an urchin diver diving off of Lighthouse Point. And I spoke with her this afternoon, and she saw a white shark. And I know this woman very well. I've known her for many years, and she's a very, very credible source. And she said this was a very small shark. It was about a 6-footer, but nonetheless, it was a white shark sighting. So what we've done is we've gone down to the beaches. Parks and Rec staff, our partners in this, have sent their staff down to the beaches and changed the date on the postings, advancing it 24 hours. So we've rolled that forward 24 hours, and so it'll be Saturday night at dusk that we would remove those signs so there are no further sightings or any marine mammal attacks by white sharks. So that's the long and short of it. It's been an interesting several days. I'm not a marine biologist. We're not marine biologists. We consult with marine biologists on all of these things. But our primary job is public safety, and we've leaned toward the cautionary side of our approach to this. It's tricky because the last thing we want to do is discourage people from coming to Santa Barbara. There hasn't been a shark attack in memory in our local beaches here. Once you get up to Lompoc and surf and, up around Point Conception, the eco-dynamics change, and there have been at least one tragic incident we all remember up at Vandenberg a couple of years ago. But so we're hoping we can pull the signs down by Saturday evening, and we're going to continue to work with the Parks Department and the county to refine our protocols on this. And that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mick. Commissioner Spicer.
Mick, thank you very much. I also wanted to thank you for taking my call the other day and going over this in detail with me. Looks like Shark Week has come in reality for us here. And one of my questions, and I appreciate the cautionary tale, is what is the protocol for a beach closure? And what would precipitate such a thing?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Spicer, at this point in time, per our protocols, an attack on a human being would prompt a beach closure. Now, that being said, in consultation with our partners to the north, Morro Bay and Port San Luis harbor masters, we may revisit that. There may be situations that prompt a beach closure that fall short of an attack on a human being. For example, a very near shore, very dramatic, evidencing of a shark. If a 14-foot shark came swimming through the water at East Beach in 6 feet of water on an afternoon, in the middle of the afternoon in August, yeah, we're going to close the beach. And then I'll worry about the protocols. But so we're going to revisit that. But right now, we're trying to be cautionary, but at the same time, trying not to be overreactive. Sure.
Commissioner Sloan.
As part of the plan, do notices go out to the people that actually have events down there? We have 2 events a week, Reef and Run and Night Moves, that both have competitive swims, and I know junior guards, but that would be through Parks and Rec, who would already know about it. But there are these other enterprises that do things. Do we send a separate notice to them or just through the public press release?
We typically, Madam Chair, Commissioner Sloan, we typically work through the Parks and Rec Department to notify the groups that have aqua camps, that have reef and run, night moves, and all those summer activities. They have staff that can get that word out very quickly. And then those groups, some of them choose to, operate in whatever fashion they choose to operate. But yes, we do have a mechanism to get the notice out.
Commissioner Bantalan.
I don't really need to follow up on that. I just think it was interesting. So the groups do have the choice, because I think both were canceled last time, and I was at Night Moves last night, and they did have the swim. So just food for thought.
If you'll allow me, Madam Chair, Commissioner Bantalan, just so that it's not perceived that there was an inconsistency in the city's approach to this, the city pulled its lifeguards from those events both times, recognizing that it probably would not be well perceived and probably not appropriate to put lifeguards in the water with these events, and we've posted the beaches with these cautionary notices. What Night Moves did was they chose to hire off-duty lifeguards from the county to shepherd their ocean activities. So that was what happened there.
And do you plan to notify the charity regatta? Oh, excuse me, Commissioner Kelly. Do you plan to notify the charity regatta of this, just a heads-up kind of thing?
Madam Chair, probably not. They're in boats.
Well, but they, yeah.
And then, and I would assume, yeah, I just, it's very tricky, the balance. You know what I mean? I want this to go away, quite frankly. I want Saturday night to come and the notices to come down and the sharks to go on their way and have so, there's an over-noticing risk that I'm very sensitive to. I'm sure they'll be aware of it. It's hard to come into this town and pick up a newspaper or talk to anybody around the beach and not be aware of, this little issue we're going through. But no, we don't intend to, personally issue a notice to the regatta.
Thanks. Commissioner Kelly, sorry.
Totally mundane. I'm going to back up to the King Harbor race, so we're off sharks for a second. I notice down in the harbor, do we make a provision when all the boats are coming in the day or two before so that they can have access to the restrooms and access on and off the dock? Because I noticed people were like shoving trash cans in the gates and stuff like that.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Kelly, we make provisions, but they have to buy key cards like anybody else, and the ones that chose not to buy key cards may have put the trash cans in the gates. Who knows? But yeah, they have to buy key cards to access those secure facilities.
Thank you very much, Mick. The next is, the item is Commissioner Bantlin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Croman, just another couple questions on that. Since we were diving into the shark thing, just curious, it is a very delicate balance. So have we seen any discernible drop-off from our merchants associations? Have they said anything? And then on the other side, we do consult with marine biologists. Have they said that there is a legitimate danger? I guess we might as well talk about both.
Sure, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair and Commissioner Bandelon. I'm going to take the second question first because I'm not sure I understand the first, but let's take the second question first. Yeah, the answer is yes. Of course, we do consult with marine biologists. One of our primary consultants has been Peter Howarth, who we all know. We've seen his articles in the newspaper. He runs the Marine Mammal Center, so he's a relative expert on marine mammalogy and shark behavior. And it's his perspective and the perspective of his colleagues, Mr. Ralph Collier, who he works closely with the Shark Research Center in Los Angeles, that there has been an uptick in the appearance of especially juvenile white sharks in the last 5 years or so. And I'm not a harbor manager, not a biologist. I can relay that to you and tell you that is, possibly consistent with the fact that the sea lions are being mauled and not killed. They've either had to be euthanized or the harbor seal, I believe, is still alive, the one that was attacked in the Carpinteria rookery. But so that's his perspective. But he said that the uptick is typically in the juvenile animals, and they're seeing them on the south coast of California too, Southern California. And I'm sorry, the first question about the harbor merchants?
Well, yeah, the first question was just if we have, I know we're doing interviews with national organizations, and people might look at that. Has there been any drop-off in business from, just anecdotally from our merchants associations, or has it been too soon to tell? I'm just kind of curious if we've seen anything on the business side yet.
That's a great question, and thank you for asking it. No, it's too early for us to tell. I'm hoping not. It's pretty packed around the waterfront these days, so I'm hoping that people are using caution when entering the ocean. But I don't know if there's been a downtick in business at the waterfront. Within the next couple of months, we get our reports. We'll certainly know.
Thank you very much, Meg. I guess that completes the report. And the next item is new business, and item number 6, the City of Santa Barbara Draft Climate Action Plan. Mary, would you read the staff recommendation? Thank you.
Recommendation that Harbor Commission receive a briefing on the draft City of Santa Barbara Climate Action Plan from City Planning staff.
Madam Chair and Commissioners, several months ago I forwarded a related study and the Climate Action Plan to the Commission for their review. We've had a couple commissioners express interest in receiving a presentation. Tonight we have Barbara Shelton, project planner with our Community Development Department, here to give you that presentation. And Barbara's also joined by John Ledbetter. He's one of our principal planners. So here she goes.
Good evening, Madam Chair and Commissioners. I am Barbara Shelton with the Planning Division. Let's see. So for this overview of the City Climate Action Plan, I'm going to briefly cover the policy basis for preparing the plan, the climate issues we're addressing, the carbon reduction strategies, sea level rise and adaptation planning, and next steps. There is quite a bit of information in the plan, so this is going to be a very brief overview. So first on the policy basis and purposes, the impetus for preparing the plan has been both state legislation as well as City Council direction. The state legislative actions identified the goal of reducing overall statewide greenhouse gas emissions to 1990 levels by the year 2030. They have another goal for reducing vehicle emissions so that they're no greater than 2005 levels. The city general plan update adopted by City Council last December directs the preparation of a climate plan and also provides relevant policy direction in the areas of energy, transportation, and land use, vegetation, waste management, water conservation, and hazards management. This general plan update received substantial public review and decision-maker acceptance for this policy direction. So the overall purposes of the state and city legislative policies and this climate plan are to reduce the level of carbon emissions generated in Santa Barbara that contribute to accelerated global climate change, and to plan for adaptation to future climate change effects, such as sea level rise. So on the climate science end, just to summarize the climate change issues we're addressing, as a result of worldwide fossil fuel combustion, accelerated changes are occurring to measures of climate, global climate, and these include high and rapidly increasing levels of heat trapping carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, rapidly increasing air and water, ocean temperatures, and rapid reduction of Arctic ice sheets. These climate changes are expected to result in some serious effects in coming decades, including, as identified by California projections for the year 2050, warmer and drier weather, more erratic and extreme weather such as severe storms and heat waves, sea level rise with associated greater storm flooding and inundation and accelerated coastal erosion, increased air and water pollution, geographic shifts of habitats and wildlife, and effects on local economies such as fisheries. Weather processes are obviously very complex, so there are uncertainties in predicting effects and timing for specific locations, but the trends and accelerated pace are clear. So this leads to the two climate change planning objectives of reducing worldwide carbon emissions to lessen the future extent and severity of these climate change effects. And also, because CO2 is already at a high level and remains in the atmosphere for decades, even with substantial effort to reduce carbon emissions, we're still going to need to plan for adaptation to climate change effects. On the carbon reduction part, the plan estimates citywide carbon emission inventories and future forecasts from electricity and natural gas usage, vehicle fuel consumption, and landfill emissions, and compares them to the state targets. The analysis shows that the city will meet the state emissions reduction targets for the years 2020 and 2030. The plan recognizes that activities to reduce carbon emissions that are already in place or undertaken in the past decade by both city government operations and the larger community, such as energy efficiency upgrades and, for example, solar thermal facilities installed at the marina, restrooms. There have been quite a lot of efforts, particularly over the last decade. The plan also identifies future strategies for coming years in the planning period to the year 2030 for reducing carbon emissions both in city government and throughout the community. And these are largely the recently adopted general plan update measures in these areas of energy conservation and renewable energy, transportation and land use to reduce vehicle fuel emissions, vegetation for carbon sequestration, waste management, and water conservation. And moving on to sea level rise and adaptation. The accelerated rate of sea level rise due to climate change is an issue for coastal cities all over the world. Over the past 100 years, globally, the sea level has gradually risen about 7 inches. And the future sea level rise projections for California, and these are measured from year 2000 levels, are for the year 2030, 7 inches is the average. They have a range of models. For 2050, 14 inches. For 2100, 47 inches. At this point, state regulatory agencies, for example, the Coastal Commission and so forth, have been directed to incorporate an assumption of 16 inches of sea level rise for their planning and permitting purposes. An initial assessment of vulnerability of Santa Barbara to sea level rise effects was conducted by UC Santa Cruz professor Gary Griggs' team, which rated potential effects. And the study findings for the year 2050 were a high probability of greater wave damage, flooding, and erosion during severe storm events, a moderate likelihood and effect from inundation, for beach retreat, a low, increased coastal cliff erosion, moderate, and tsunami low. And then they also looked at further ahead to the year 2100, and the Griggs report rated all of these effects as likely as high or very high. These are actually all phenomenon that we already experienced, just not at the, they're now projected to occur in the future at a much accelerated rate than has historically occurred. The plan recognizes that we have a number of ongoing management processes in place that will need to incorporate and address these changes, such as emergency preparedness planning, public facilities planning, development permitting processes, and so forth. The plan also identifies some measures to augment coastal technical data, including tidal gauge monitoring of sea level, sea cliff monitoring, beach profiles, and some better topography and updated flood mapping. Then, once you have some better data to work with, to prepare more detailed vulnerability assessments and then identify options for adaptation. So, for example, for public facilities, these could include measures such as strengthening in place, elevating, or relocation. The plan also identifies continuation and expansion of other city programs such as, well, we mentioned emergency preparedness, such as more community resilience planning, wildfire flood control and water supply planning, public facilities planning, biological resources protection, and coordination with economic sectors. Then moving on to next steps, the draft plan received public review and comment from June to August 6th and had also a Planning Commission hearing. And so we're now preparing the final plan to forward for a City Council adoption hearing on September 18th. This will be followed by, obviously, plan implementation over the coming years, and would also include periodic monitoring and reporting to the public and decision makers. I also wanted to mention that the climate plan can be accessed online at the city website. And then, Madam Chair, that completes my presentation, and we're available for questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Ms. Shelton. Commission questions, comments? Commissioner Friedman?
Thank you for that report. I think it's great what we're doing. We're ahead of the curve locally on many issues on reductions. So I had two comments, one geared towards adaptation, or one adaptation, the other towards greenhouse gas reductions. And it's on the it's something I noticed on vegetation, one of the items there, and it was National Geographic ran a big story, and they have it online now if you were to Google National Geographic rooftop gardens. And it comes, there's so many options out there, and I'm not sure if we're exploring those, though. The pinnacle of it is, if anyone's ever seen pictures of Chicago City Hall, the roof of Chicago City Hall, I encourage you to go online and just Google it. It's quite amazing. It's the roof of City Hall, which is this huge skyscraper, is as great as any park that we have here. It's vegetation, everyone goes out there. It's basically having an urban forest, 50 stories up in the air. Locally, I also saw one that I thought was intriguing, was on bus stops where you have the bench and then you just have a little roof over it to keep people out of the rain. is they put just small little plants there on top of the bus stops all over town. And over time, the benefit is that, one, it's kind of nice to look at, but also you can get, it helps with runoff from rains because those plants are capturing some of the rain right there. But I thought they were just neat ideas to look at, and they're just fascinating pictures. I encourage you to look at them and see if there's any applicability in Santa Barbara. And then towards adaptation, I think it's something that we definitely need to plan for. There's a report, and you're probably aware of it, but it came out about a year or so ago from San Francisco State University, and it was commissioned by the Department of Boating and Waterways, where they studied the economic impacts of sea level rise, and they chose 5 beach communities in California, and one of them was Carpinteria. And so they looked at looking at a baseline of if everything stayed as is with sea level, and they projected it out 1 meter rise, 2 meters, or 1.4 meter for now in 2050 and into the future 2100. And the costs are quite staggering, and they put it in terms of 2010 dollars, so the dollars are applicable. And just in Carpinteria, with a 1 meter sea level rise, which is a lot more than we're talking here, by 2050, if that was to take place, it would be $2.4 million just in emergency costs from flooding and other things, just to the town of Carpinteria. So that's a good report to look at. It came out about a year or so ago. And then just in terms of what we're doing for our vulnerability assessments, I think it's something we definitely need to look at in terms of our infrastructure, because what concerns me is we've seen, like El Nino of '98, there was Ledbetter parking lot was underground, and Cabrillo gets flooded, and you add another foot of sea level rise with greater storms. What's that going to do? And my concerns are with the infrastructure, the roads, the sewers, and everything we have down there. So I think time is of the essence to get the planning underway, because the science is out there. I know there's people that doubt it, but that debate, I think, has already been hashed out. And we need to plan now, because 2030 is going to be here before we know it, in 2050. And with some of the other reports I've seen, the ice caps are melting faster than they even predicted, and that was just a month or so ago. So adaptation is great. Anything we can do to speed up that process, I look forward, and I appreciate your report.
Any other comments? Commissioner Sloan?
Again, thank you for the report. It was very informative. I have one question, and it's maybe a little nitpicky, but on page 12 of the report, we talk about the cost considerations, and we have solar energy ongoing as a low cost. How is that figured? Because I always thought that buying and deploying solar was fairly costly. Yeah. Okay. And again, it might be nitpicking. Item number 13 there.
Associated with them, and some of those kinds of things are items where you have initially some cost when you're first putting things in. Oh, I'm sorry. Solar is one of the kinds of things where there are some initial costs for putting things in, although it does help to sometimes reduce ongoing operational costs as well. But these are all sort of general ratings.
If I may interject, Madam Chair and Commissioner Sloan, these are city actions that are going on. The city has several large solar arrays. One is at the corporate yard, and there was a power purchase agreement with that, so the cost of the city is relatively low. And I think that reflects that low rating in there. It's just the city's actions, not solar power in general, as applied broadly in a community, just what the city has done. So they've got a couple of solar projects that have been relatively low cost because of these purchase agreements, and I'm sure that's what it's referring to, if that helps.
Yeah, I'm just concerned when I see something like this, because the incentives and the cost could change significantly, and if someone sees this and goes, solar energy's low, so let's just require the harbor to put it on top of all of the buildings, or something like that. I just want to make sure that we have a realistic picture of some of these cost things before we start implementing too much of this. Things that we haven't budgeted for. Obviously, in the future, we can build a budget around some of these things, and I think we should.
Madam Chair, I'd also just mention that a number of the city actions in the past years to either do energy conservation or solar projects and so forth, the city has been able to obtain some grant funding to help with those costs.
Thank you.
Commissioner Bantlin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of questions, and this may be actually for waterfront staff. One along the likes of Commissioner Sloan on number 38, marine shipping emissions. I wasn't trying to play on my phone. I was just trying to look something up, and I know that marine emissions off the coast are a majority of certain particulates. I don't know about carbon. And it just says the effectiveness is low. I would think that should be one of our main priorities. I know it's not under our control. It's not in our purview. The shipping industry has a choice to go through the channel or go around, and there's some things with the military that are interrupting that. And I know we've seen some positive signs, but just anecdotally, can you speak to that at all? I guess just emissions from the shipping industry and how you see that changing in the channel or going around. And then I have a follow-up afterward.
Madam Chair, just first I would just note that the program that's in the plan is really just to support regional and state efforts to reduce marine shipping emissions. And so that's partly because of the fact that we don't have too much clout on actually taking action.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Bandelon, I would add this. I agree with Barbara that we don't have that clout necessarily, but there are agencies and organizations with which the waterfront is associated and works in conjunction with at times. One of them is the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary and the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary Advisory Council. And they have been on top of the shipping issue for several years, both ship strikes on whales and emissions and what have you. And from my perspective, if somebody were to ask me today who's leading the way relative to our interaction with the shipping industry and, for the lack of a better expression, holding their feet to the fire on emissions issues, it would be the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary folks, because they have a vested interest in the discharges into the sanctuary and in and around sanctuary waters, and they're very much involved in that.
Okay, I appreciate that, and I realize we don't have much clout. I know I've been in a couple meetings with APCD staff and actually the mayor of Santa Barbara with one of the major shippers who has been trying to lower their emissions, and it is a tough issue just because we don't have a lot of say, although it's one of the biggest effects on Santa Barbara County, so it's interesting. What was my other question here? Oh, just on adaptation, sort of to follow up to Commissioner Friedman. I heard the previous director about a year ago talk about when we rebuilt the wharf, we actually added, I think, maybe 1.5 feet in height on the end. And I'm just sort of curious if we make those considerations when we are changing or adding different things, if we're sort of thinking ahead on height and different things like that.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Bandelon, you're referring to when the Endostern Wharf was rebuilt after the 1998 fire, and they did that in consideration of high waves. They did the same thing in Ventura as well. Obviously, it was sea level rise wasn't an issue back then. Rebuilding the breakwater cap, we've increased the height 7 inches to meet building code standards, not directly because of sea level rise in climate change. It just so happens those things would probably be benefit. When you speak of adaptation, and I did comment on this plan in the vulnerability assessment along those lines, that adaptation should consider lots of things. There's an emphasis on managed retreat where it's possible, and we should perhaps discuss things, adaptation strategies such as raising the breakwater, raising the wharf, and those kind of things, if it's a valuable resource to this community to have a harbor and those kind of things. It's a bit premature. I think the adaptation strategies are all policy related, and a lot of them focus on gather more information and get a better handle on just what the rate of sea level rise might be associated with climate change.
And if I can also add to that, Madam Chair, Commissioner Banlin, hearkening back to my old position at the Redevelopment Agency and working on the initial phases of the Cabrillo Arts Pavilion and completely redoing that facility, that was right up front one of the things that we were taking under advice, is that looking at the refurbishment of the building from the ground up is bringing the building up higher to looking out to the rising sea levels and things like that. So from the city perspective, as Carl was saying, the coastal facilities that we have, when there is an opportunity or when there is funding to do something, they are looking at addressing this situation.
I really appreciate that. And sometimes, I guess it makes sense. It doesn't really change aesthetically or different things. There's no downside to raising it. Other times, like Carl said, we may not be there yet, and it may be more of a debate, but I appreciate that we're having that conversation. So thank you.
Commissioner Friedman.
Just to follow up on Commissioner Bantelan's references to marine shipping, the Air Pollution Control District is a local body, and you referenced that really has been working at the forefront to address this issue. And one of the items that they've worked on is to reduce the speed of ships coming through the channel, and redirecting due to whale strikes. And a lot of this came because of whale strikes, but and a lot of the data. So there's actually a benefit. We're working on one policy. We're working to reduce gases and emissions, actually to help the whales in terms of strikes and where they're going. But there was a report on today's APCD agenda that addresses the marine shipping issue. And one of the items that I found quite astounding, if I recall it correctly, was that by reducing the speed of the through the channel from about 10 knots of boats, it reduces about 50% emissions. Somewhere around those lines. I could be wrong, but I remember reading that not too long ago. And it was on today's report, so it has a huge impact by just reducing the speed.
And just to add to that, it actually lowers our cost as well. And talking to one of the major ones who's sort of taking the lead in slow steaming, it's a benefit for them there. And if they go out far enough, they can burn cheaper fuel, which isn't necessarily better for emissions, but they're also slow steaming out there. So, I think there are benefits both ways, but I appreciate you bringing that up.
Thank you very much. My questions were asked by Commissioner Bantelan, so I have none. So thank you very much for your report. Moving on to the next item of the new business, which is the lease agreement with Clean Seas. And Mary, would you read the staff report, please?
Recommendation that Harbor Commission recommends City Council approval of a 5-year lease with one 5-year option with Clean Seas LLC for the approximately 1,800 square feet of water space adjacent to Marina 1F Finger.
Good evening again. Since 1970, Clean Seas has been providing oil spill response duties in the Santa Barbara Channel. Their designated area of response includes Ventura County, Santa Barbara County, as well as San Luis Obispo County and the Channel Islands. Due to the presence of several oil rigs off of our coast, there has been significant interest by the Coast Guard as well as your commission and staff to provide lease space to Clean Seas for one of their or a number of their oil spill quick response vessels. On June 4th of this year, the Harbor Commission Marina Construction Committee recommended to the Harbor Commission that leasing approximately 1,800 square feet of water space adjacent to Marina 1F Finger was the best option regarding that space among a series of other options. And on June 21st, the Harbor Commission recommended the temporary priority use for berthing Clean Seas in that space at the Marina 1F Finger. Staff has since negotiated and developed a lease agreement with Clean Seas. The availability this water space, again, approximately 1,800 square feet of water space, adjacent to Marina One F Finger, provides a unique opportunity to house any one of the Clean Seas vessels up to 70 feet, and that includes 2 of their new vessels, including the Ocean Guardian and Ocean Scout. Just to clarify, it would be 1 vessel at a time, but it does allow us them to switch out and rotate in and out. These particular new vessels contain oil skimming equipment, as well as 1,500 feet of oil containment boom, and have top speeds of 26 knots. The base rent for the Clean Seas space would be $2,200 per month, and as Mary stated at the start, it's a 5-year term with an option for an additional 5-year. And that completes my discussion. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Brian. Any questions? Commissioner Kelly.
Yes, Brian, quick question. With the 5-year option, and then you may need to ask Carl, is that going to bump into the rebuild? And I thought we were going to build that out and turn that eventually into additional slips.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Kelly, that is our plan. It's part of Phase 7, which could be as early as 2017. So it just about coincides with the end of the lease term. I think we previously mentioned last month or the month before, we think there may be space for them at 4B Entai, where we had developed these large slips in 2006, I believe, and a couple of leases will be coming up at about that same time. There may be a little marina management going on, moving some vessels around, but there's going to be a home in one way, shape, or form for them, and we will go on with the expansion of F Finger.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other questions, comments?
Madam Chair, if you'll allow me, we wanted to show you in coordination with this agenda item that the new barge, waste oil barge, Clean Seas barge has arrived, and it is really quite something as well. It holds a capacity of 15,000 barrels of oil. I believe that's 2 to 3 times as much as the old barge held, and it has deployment equipment and all kinds of crazy, cranes and booms and what have you on it. So this will complement the fast attack oil response vessels, one of which will have the lease in the harbor. We just wanted to give you a visual of this. It's out there in the East Beach anchorage.
Great, thank you. Do I have a Commissioner?
No, I moved
I was going to say, do I have a motion?
And I'll second that motion.
Okay.
I moved to approve.
And it's been seconded. Are we all in favor?
Aye.
We're all in favor. Motion passes. The next item on the agenda is the Municipal Code Title 17 amendments. Mary, would you please read the staff report?
Recommendation that Harbor Commission A, receive and consider a staff report describing proposed amendments to Title 17 of the Santa Barbara Municipal Code, and B, recommend to City Council adoption of an ordinance incorporating proposed amendments to Title 17.
Mr. Cronin.
Madam Chair and Commissioners, as you know, department staff annually reviews Title 17. That deals with harbor issues of the Santa Barbara Municipal Code to ensure that it accurately and adequately addresses all the policies and programs and procedures fairly, and that it provides, in particular, a legal framework within which we can conduct our administrative affairs. That legal framework in particular needs to be articulated in such a manner so that the laws that it describes are enforceable. The code is only as good as our ability to enforce it, and our ability to enforce it is only as good as our ability to argue our case in court, in case someone contests a citation, for example. And so sometimes the items come to you as a result of the need for clarification and adding crisp edges to some of the enforcement language, some of the code language, because when we get to court, some of our judges and our local folks who sit on our juries aren't necessarily familiar with the workings of our unique workings of the waterfront, and so it has to be very crisply and clearly defined. So you'll see one tonight that we're going to talk about that reflects that. Sometimes also we bring items to you where the need to clarify items results from squabbles between tenants or boaters or what have you, and where we need to make it clear so as if one brings suit against the other, or if we end up in court on a criminal infraction or what have you, that we have crisp, clear enforcement guidelines. And so those are two that I'm going to bring to you tonight, and I may come to you again later in the year with a few more. We keep a file on these as the problems occur, and we bring them to you sort of in lump sum, and these are the first two. We'll probably come to you later in the spring. The first one has to do with operation of vessels in the harbor. That it's articulated in the Municipal Code 1712-150. And that part of the code addresses excessive speed in the harbor, and it mandates that vessels travel at less than 5 miles an hour. And among other things, it bans any wake in the harbor. It has a no-wake standard. And I think if anybody's familiar with boating in the harbor, there's really no such thing as no wake. And so what we've done here is we want to clarify the no-wake aspect of this ordinance so that it's consistent with the language and intent of the rest of the ordinance. So what we propose to do is add language that would say creates a wake that causes docks, floating structures, or vessels secured to docks or floating structures to move. That's where it ended before, and we're adding in a manner that either threatens personal safety or causes or could cause damage to structures or vessels. We've worked with the city attorney's office on this. They've seen this language. They're in agreement that it's not inappropriate, and we would advance it tonight for your approval so as to clarify the intent of this ordinance. The second ordinance section we wanted to address tonight is permission to moor. You've heard from us on this issue before. Permission to moor is probably one of the more frequently written citations outside of illegal camping and open container and what have you at the waterfront. This is people who come in and anchor in the middle of the mooring area, people who anchor in the summertime anchorage in the middle of the winter, often by mistake. Don't get me wrong. We usually inform these people, oops, you know, you're supposed to anchor over here. But this is for folks who stake their claim and want to stay there. Folks who don't pay their bill and refuse to leave the harbor, visiting boats and what have you. So these are some of the areas where we utilize this ordinance. And what we were informed of by the city attorney's office was that there's a slight loophole here, and it's one that's easily exploitable. If you go to court on this and somebody challenges a citation for permission to moor, let's say they left the harbor, they didn't leave the harbor, they refused to leave the harbor, and they've been there for 2 months, and we cited them, and they won't leave, et cetera. And let's say they were a boat that was towed into the harbor after it broke down, or it was a boat that actually wasn't owned by the individual who left it in the harbor. Well, when you get to court, what typically juries and judges like to see are proof of ownership. And if you didn't own the boat, well, how can I be held liable for this, that, and the other? So what this does, it qualifies this ordinance language to add the fact that you not only, it's unlawful for any person to moor, berth, dock, or anchor, or any vessel, etc., or allow a vessel, in other words, under their command or control to remain moored, berthed, docked, or anchored. So it gets past just the pure ownership idea to control and command, and that pretty much, I think, would very much help us with our local judges and juries enforcing this ordinance and making sure that it's crystal clear what exactly is intended. And these are the two we bring to you tonight. Like I say, we'll probably be back in the spring with more, but we'd appreciate your comments and ultimately your approval of these to move on to Ordinance Committee and City Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mick. Questions, comments? Commissioner Sloan.
Yeah, thanks, Mick. Just in talking about the speed limit thing for a minute, you know, operating a boat in the harbor sometimes can be a challenge with all the stand-up paddlers and the kayaks going by, and those are the ones that are really most affected by wakes. You know, someone's on a stand-up, they're learning how to do it. You know, you almost have to put your boat in neutral until they get by, you know. But do we instruct the people that rent kayaks and stand-ups how their clients are supposed to transit the channel? Because I can't tell you how many times I've been out there and they're going right down the center of the federal channel and things like that, and they might not know. You know, they're out there and they see a big boat coming, and you know they don't know what to do. And so I think that would be something that would be worthwhile to work with.
Commissioner Kramer, Commissioner Sloan, we do advise all those businesses in the harbor who rent stand-up paddles, kayaks, and things like that, of their appropriate egress and ingress in and out of the harbor. I think one of the problems is the folks who rent those are told that, but once they get away from the place where they rent those, they're kind of on their own. And I know Harbor Patrol does pay close attention to that. And it goes along with things such as having your personal flotation device along with you, and oftentimes they won't have it or it won't be on. So it goes along with that. But we do educate them, and I know part of Harbor Patrol's everyday duties is educating both the purveyor of those goods as well as the folks who use them.
And then just a separate question on that. How many citations do we issue or warnings do we issue for excessive speed in the harbor? Is it one a month? Or I know they mention it to people all the time, but do we actually go after the people who are chronic abusers of it, I might say?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Sloan, the ones who typically have the toughest time with that are our jet ski clientele. Part of it's the nature of the beast. It's pretty hard to slow those things down, and they don't maneuver very well when they're going slowly. But those are the ones that we've issued citations to primarily. We don't issue a lot of citations for excessive speed because most folks don't speed in the harbor. Most folks are very respectful. But the biggest problem is usually people pull back when they get to when they're parallel with the end of Stearns Wharf, and then they're still flying along by the time they're halfway into the harbor and they create a wake. And so we make a reasonable amount of contacts, a moderate amount of contacts, but issue very few citations for that. Most folks are very courteous and respectful.
Thank you.
Any questions, comments? And I had a question. Usually in changes of ordinances that are in response to problems, have there been specific problems which have caused these ordinances to be changed, or these are anticipating?
Madam Chair, these are in response to issues, situations, disagreements in the harbor. The first one on permission to moor is one where we've had individuals who have chronically ignored the rules and wanted to plant themselves, and then they wait to go, and then they demand jury trials, and then they say, well, I didn't own the boat, and I have a bill of sale from Joe, who had a bill of sale from Sam, who had a bill of sale from Susie, in the last 4 weeks, and I'm not the registered owner because I never went up to the Department of Motor Vehicles and registered my vessel. That's in response to that. The other is in response to some complaints we've had of vessels that make a wake, but we couldn't determine either by personally observing it or by speaking with people who personally observed it or people who were accused of making the wake that they actually posed any harm to structure, posed any, posed any threat of personal harm to individuals and what have you. And we are of the suspicion that it might be personal, those accusations. And so we thought clarifying this law to make it, quite frankly, a little tighter so that it really had to really mean something as opposed to just saying he made a wake, he's breaking the law. That's the result from that.
Great, thank you very
Sure.
much. Anyone else? Then do I have a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Now, after the motion, I don't know if this is proper in the rules, I mean, those who know better than I, in terms of the changes in Title 17, Chapter 17, there have been various comments at various points that maybe the Harbor Commission might have an ad hoc committee to look at the overall items within the code affecting the waterfront. Does that, I'm just throwing that thought out. I mean,
Madam Chair, if you're looking for a staff response, I would say certainly you could do that. You could make it an ad hoc committee or a standing committee, but to be honest with you, we've been working on code maintenance, and I'm going to say on a par with or ahead of all the other departments in the city for about 15 years. And that doesn't mean it can't use some tune-up. We're always got our eye to it, and we could always use the Commission's help. But it was a couple of commissions ago when Ken Owen, I believe, it might have been you, Chair Kramer, but I thought it was Ken Owen who said, when you have these ordinance issues that go to Ordinance Committee and Council, could you please bring them to the Commission first? It may have been you, Commissioner Kramer. But so this is an opportunity to do that, and we will always bring proposed changes to you. But if you want to form a committee and have a look at those changes before they come to the Commission, you could certainly do that, I suppose.
okay, great. Thank you very much.
Sure.
And next item is Commission staff communications. Do we have anything to communicate?
Nothing to report.
Okay, Commission? Next item, is there a motion?
So moved.
All right, second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you very much.